Hey, how's it going everyone? Welcome back to Keeping Fish Simple. So in today's video, I thought I might discuss how my automatic water change system works and how I change all the water in the fish room. Now, obviously, when it comes to fish tanks, we need to change water. It's a pretty commonly known fact, and if you don't know that, I don't know what you're doing on this video, but obviously with this many tanks in the fish room, I think we have 65 tanks in here, there's a lot of water that needs to be maintained and changed. Now, I used to have a fish room in my mum's old breakfast room, and in that fish room I had 8 tanks, and all of those tanks were manually water changed, so I'd actually siphon water out of those tanks and replace it with buckets. And then when I decided to upgrade into this fish room to breed fish for profit and make this my job, I knew that when I had this many tanks, there was no way that I could actually manage all of these aquariums with me siphoning out and changing water that way with buckets and hoses and things like that. It just wasn't going to work. So I had to come up and do a bit of research with how I was actually going to change water in this fish room and come up with some sort of automated system to change water in this fish room. And in today's video, I'm going to share that with you. Now, I didn't develop this system. I'm sure someone else has got it. And I'm just going to give you guys a quick disclaimer that any system that you use is not going to be like one size fits all. You need to actually watch quite a few videos and do a bit of research on the water in your area to try and figure out the best way to do this. Now, my system is going to be a really good blueprint for a lot of you guys to follow, but it's not going to be the be all and end all, because there's going to be things that you need to adjust to your system to either make it fit in your allocated area or to actually treat the water and make sure that it's safe for your fish. So in this fish room, I actually spend less time maintaining water and changing water than I did in my previous fish room. That's because this is all automated. I do manually change water in this fish room, and it's only on a few tanks, and it's only probably once every week or 2 weeks. The tanks that actually do take a lot of maintenance are the discus tanks, and I don't really mind doing that because the reward is worth it. Like, I get a lot of money when I sell discus, so it's worth it for them. I keep all the rams on a separate system because I really like to lower that pH for breeding, but I find that automatic water change systems are really good for growing out fish, because growing out fish, the most important thing is water quality and making sure there's no ammonia in that water. And if you can have an automatic water change system, it's just so worth it. For anyone that's thinking about breeding fish and taking this seriously, I guarantee that you will need this system, because there's going to be days where you come into the fish room and you just don't want to change water. You just, you've had a long day, and if you have an automatic water change system, it is such a relief. Not having to take out the bucket and spend an extra couple of hours cleaning water when you don't want to, just turning on a switch and leaving, it's absolutely awesome, and I can't stress enough how important it is to the success and how much this has played a part in my moderate success in this fish room. So without any further ado, let's get into it. I'll explain the whole system, and I'll explain some things that I don't think are good about my system and things that I would improve if I had a different setup and things like that. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get started. So quickly to run down how this system works, basically this is what I would call an overflow system. So we have all of our water in the tanks. The way the water gets changed is we just pump new water in. That new water, it comes into the aquarium and it starts to overflow out the back, where that overflow water is then wastewater and it's sent out to the drain and disposed of. So it's a pretty simple system, and at first it didn't make a lot of sense to me, because I thought if you're just injecting water into an aquarium, it's not going to actually change the water, because I thought you need to lower the level and then fill it back up. The way this system kind of works is through dilution. So you'll add new water that's clean, and it's going to dilute the old water and make it a little bit more clean. Now, this isn't going to be the most efficient way to change water. You can definitely drain aquariums and find a system to do that, but I found that this is the best one because you can't overchange the water. Like, if you empty a tank and then it has to fill back up to a certain amount and you don't have an overflow system in place, then that's not going to be the best. This one you can just turn on and it can go on forever as long as the water's treated and everything's safe. So it's not a complicated system in that manner. I did all my research and I had a look at different systems like drip systems, which is an automatic water change where it's constantly dripping in new water 24 hours a day. I thought that could be a good idea, but it didn't really seem to make sense in this room. I couldn't completely control and manipulate when I wanted to do water changes, and I thought that it just wouldn't be as effective as just doing the overflow system. So that's another method you could use. I'm not going to go into detail on that though, because I don't think it's really that good of an idea. There is some cons to having an overflow system, and the first con is you can't adjust the water for each tank. So like, for instance, if you want to have a tank with a pH of 6 and you have a tank with a pH of 7 and you want to alter water hardness, which you're not going to need to do for grow outs, hopefully, but for triggering fish and raising up little babies and things like that, you will. This system won't work for those tanks, so you will have to manually change those tanks yourself. But that's just one flaw. Another flaw with my system that can be easily changed if you wanted to or thought it was necessary is the temp of the water. So the temperature when the water comes in is normally less than the temperature in the tank. Now, I've actually intentionally left this because it helps to spawn a lot of the cories plecos that I have, because I think it's been like a big cold water change. And this only adjusts the water in the tank by a couple of degrees and then it just warms back up. So if you're in a freezing area, this might be something that's necessary, but for me it's not necessary. And another thing that kind of sucks about my system is that there's a lot of room for error, and I really have to focus on the small nitty-gritty things when I turn on my water change system to make sure I don't accidentally poison all of my fish. Now, there's a few reasons for that we'll go into later on in the video, but I think we'll go over and we'll start talking about how the water change system starts in my other room. Okay, so excuse the darkness in this room because this is a little bit of a dungeon room, but this is my other garage, and this is the room where I store all my fish food in this fridge, and I also keep all my worm cultures in here. But I also, behind me, we're not going to be able to see it because it's really dark in here, but I keep a big 3,000 litre water tank in here, and it's linked up to the tap, and this is where the water change system starts. Now, because in my municipal water supply I've got chloramines in there, I need to treat my water differently. So most water in people's areas is either treated with 1 or 2 chemicals, and those chemicals are either chlorine or chloramines. Now, chlorine is used in quite a lot of areas, and it's actually a lot better than chloramines because chlorine doesn't last as long and it actually evaporates out of water, and it's really, really easy to take out of water. But chloramines stay in the water a lot longer and are really, really hard to filter out. So you can actually just use a carbon block filter to get chlorine out of the water, or you can just leave it outside for 24 hours and it normally evaporates out. But for areas where the water needs to spread out and has to go a long distance, a lot of people use chloramines. So by the time that water gets to the end of where it needs to go and is consumed, it's still got something in there to stop bacteria and things from forming. Now, personally, in my area, we've got that, and that means that I can't run my water through just like a filter and straight into the aquariums like most people do. I actually have to treat my water a little bit differently, which is kind of annoying, but I can't really do anything about it. So what that means is I actually pump the water into a tank where I then use water conditioner, treat it, and that will remove all the chloramines and make it aquarium safe. And then that's pumped into the fish room and into all of the tanks. Now, the way I do this is I use it's like a rainbird, but this thing's called like a beehive, and it's basically linked up to my phone. And what I do is I make sure that the pump that I use to get the water into the other fish room is turned off. I then turn on the rainbird beehive thing, and then it turns on the water from the tap and it fills up the tank where there's a float valve, and then the float valve at the top of the tank turns off the water so that the tank can't overflow, and then I come in and I treat that water with water conditioner. Now, I know it's not the best method, there's a lot of other ways you could do this, but like I said, that chloramine would be very, very expensive to filter out using like a different kind of filter. Like, it would have cost me so much money to get that filter, and it just wouldn't have been economical just for the amount of water that I was using, because I'm only using 3,000 litres, which might seem like a lot, but it's really not. So that's the way I do it. The float valve stops the whole thing from overflowing, and it's similar to like a toilet. Toilets use float valves, they're very, very common. So that's the way the water tank fills up. I then leave it for a couple of hours. Sometimes I try and leave it for a day if I can, but normally I change water every day. So then to come in and turn on the water change system, I have a water pump that's connected to these copper pipes, which I actually got a plumber to install, and I would recommend getting a plumber to install all your like structural plumbing. It's really, really helpful. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you could do personally, but I think the plumber can do a lot better of a job than you can, and yes, it can be a little bit expensive to get a plumber to do it, but it's definitely worth it. So we've got that pump linked up. It's just one of the pumps with another float valve on it. I think it's for clearing flooded areas. So the way it works is it's got like this float valve on top of it, and when that float valve's hit the bottom, it turns off the pump, and that way the pump can't burn out. So I plug in my pump when I want to use the water change, and it'll drain the whole tank into the fish room. That's how the water gets into the tank, and that's how the water gets to the fish room. And then that's how the water gets into the fish room, and then the water comes up through this pipe that you can see here. So all these copper pipes, and then it's then spread across the whole fish room. So I'll show you guys on a video all the pipes that it goes to in here. Now in the fish room, I have a bunch of different valves, so I can turn off different sections if I want to. So you can see here, if I want to turn off all of the 20-gallon tanks in the fish room, I can just switch this latch, and then that means that there's not going to be any water going into these tanks. It's likewise for all the other racks. I can turn off each rack if I want to, and that means I normally have either side switched off. So basically I'm either changing water on this side of the fish room or that side of the fish room. I find that pump doesn't have enough push to get water to every single tank in the fish room. I mean, I could upgrade that pump, but it just wouldn't be really worth it because I just want to control each side of the fish room anyways. I don't need to change as much water on this side because I'm not growing out fish as I do on this side. So that's how the water gets in here. Now, after the copper pipes, it then goes into these irrigation lines that I actually created myself. I did them all up from a hardware store. If you just go to your gardening section and you use a lot of the irrigation lines, you can actually be really, really creative and find different ways to create the systems that you want to. So it's not too complicated, it's pretty basic. And then each tank has its own little tiny valve, so I can either switch that on or off. That's how the water gets into the tanks. Now, you guys might have noticed in some of my tanks, you've seen these big up pipes, and those are the drainage valves for the tanks. Now, what happens is, like I was saying before, the water is then pumped into the tank, it's then diluted, and then all of that wastewater is going to overflow out the back, and then it goes down underneath the tanks and then finds its way out onto the street. And that's basically how the water gets changed. Now, there's a few things that I had to tweak for my system to make this system fit in this room. This is only a 16-meter square garage, which is a single car garage, so there's not a lot of space in this fish room. So there was quite a few things I needed to tweak to make all these tanks fit in here. Now, the first thing I had to do was I had to make sure the plumbing went down instead of out the back of the tanks. So you'll see a lot of people, they like to drill the back of the aquarium and then put in their overflow there. I didn't have that luxury because it would have taken too much room from the sides of the tank, and it would have made these corridors that you can see I'm standing in now way too narrow. Like, it would have been like me walking like a penguin in here. It would have definitely not been workable. Like, this fish room's already tight enough as it is. That would have made it really, really tight, and I wouldn't have been able to fit in here. So that was the first thing. So that meant that I had to put all of the drains at the bottom of the tanks. So that's why I've got the up pipes, and it overflows down, and all the plumbing's basically underneath the tanks. There's no plumbing on the side of the tanks, which I personally like. I know it would have been a lot easier to build it the other way. The other thing I made the mistake of early was not doing my drainage right. You need to make sure you have a lot of grade to make sure that your water gets out, because a lot of people don't talk about the drainage, and the drainage is super important because you're going to need to make sure that the water is constantly grading downwards and can find its way out of the room that way. Otherwise, you'll need to get like a pump to suck it out or something like that. So all of the water, when it overflows, is on a grade, and it slopes down and goes out of the fish room that way. When I first built this system, I allowed enough grade, but my pipes weren't big enough, so I only had really, really small pipes. And what happened was, when I was changing the water, there was way too much water going into that pipe. It was actually flooding the pipe before it could escape, and I was just flooding the fish room. I actually had to rebuild that again, and that's something I definitely would recommend to everyone, is to make sure that your drainage pipes are huge, because otherwise you're going to have issues that way. But I think I've covered everything I want to in this video. I just wanted to show you guys how the system worked, because I get so many questions from people asking how my system works. There's a lot of other videos on YouTube where you'll see exactly the kind of parts that people use and things like that. But if I was going to give you my advice, I would just try and watch as many videos on this topic as possible and come up with your own method that will work. I guess this video was just trying to give you guys the idea of the overflow method. I think it's definitely the best method for changing water. I think it's the system that most people use, but it's not going to fit everyone's needs and wants. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you guys in the next one.